We've got a lot of music aficionados in the crowd. Well, that's not me. I'm doing the best with my voice. That's the sound guys. Come on, sound guys. What are we doing? Can you hear me? Red leather, yellow leather? Yeah, more? What, you need more? Irene was delighted by the sight of the bright fire. Can you hear that? Old Mother Rebel had a rough cut punt. Can you? I've got a lapel mic, but I know. See, Giles isn't mixing this. That's why. That's why. Everyone can hear me now. Yes. Anyway, no. Man, you're all rock people. You're all deaf. Think about that. Well, there's no sound at all. There's absolutely none. Anyway, you can hear me? Good on me. This is just for you. So, Giles Martin, let's talk about you for a moment.
Oh, please not.
Son of the great George Martin. And so, is this true? So, in the early days when your dad was losing his hearing, you had to sit there on the sessions and help him mix the sessions. Is that true?
Yeah. Can you hear me? Apart from kind of the people at the back.
Yeah.
Can you hear me? My father started losing his hearing when I was a teenager, and he would bring me in because he wanted work. In a funny way, he didn't want to tell people he was losing his hearing, but he was still a brilliant musician and could hear stuff in his head, and I would be able to translate what I knew was in his head to what we did on the board.
Because he didn't actually want you to get into music. He wanted you to...
No. He wanted me to get a proper job, and it didn't work out very well. So, so he wanted me to... Yeah, he wanted... it was just... Listen, Andrew will tell you the music industry is a treacherous place. So he was just worried about his son working in the music industry. But it's worked out. I got away with it so far. But yeah, he was an amazing man and was very supportive in the end once he realized I was a lost cause.
I should point out we're streaming this on Facebook Live, so hello Facebook Live people, give it up for the Facebook Live people that are watching this. So how did you come across to this? How did you come across to INXS Kick? How did you get to do this, what we're listening to today? And just for the dummies amongst us, i.e. me, so what have you actually done with this in this time?
Well, I mean, listen, for me, it's a massive honor. I mean, INXS were and are one of the greatest bands ever to have lived. They are a terrific band. And I owe a lot of debt to Andrew, funny enough. We met in Japan. I was with my dad, being his ears, working on a concert. And when we got back to London, Andrew called me and said, well, I helped master the Greatest Hits album. And this was in 1994, I think.
That's great.
And he was the first person to take me out of my father's shadow, if you like, and go, would you like to do this? And I learned so much from being with him and the work I was doing, and we ended up working on some tracks together. And what happens? Here we are, 30 years on, and this opportunity came up. And what this is this is a surround mix. So we're in an Atmos theater where the speakers are all around you, and so we took the original multi-tracks that the band made with brilliant producer Chris Thomas, and we remixed it at Abbey Road so you get to hear what you heard today.
Because it's come a long way as far as like when you were starting out, it was all tracks and 8-inch and all that sort of stuff, and now it's all Pro Tools and everything like that. So and when this particular album came out, that's what you were doing. You were doing tape loops, weren't you, Andrew? Particularly with New Sensation. Looping that particular guitar riff around.
Yeah, sure, Jonesy. We were, and can I just stop for a second?
Mm.
I just want to thank everybody for coming tonight.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. And I'd also like to thank Chris Murphy for dreaming all this up and supporting us. And all the people in our lives, our road crews, as Giles pointed out, Chris Thomas, who produced the album, David Nicholas. And I'd really also like to extend my thanks to the people you haven't seen in the background, like all of our road crews over so many years, a lot of years, and people in the background who really supported our career. And I'd also like to really, acknowledge in a huge way my fellow band members, to my brothers Tim and John and Kurt and Gary, all with us tonight. And of course, Michael is not with us tonight, but he would have loved this, and he would have thought it was really fantastic. Yeah. Thank you. And I'd like to thank Giles for being with us and helping put all this together as well for us. It sounds amazing, mate. It really does.
Thank you.
But to answer your question, we on the Kick album, Jonesy, we used to experiment a lot with things, with loops and all sorts of things. You know, we used to try different things. We didn't really know what we were doing, to be honest. You know, people say, well, you know, how did you know to do that all these years later? We didn't really, and I think to the credit of all the other guys in the band, I think, and Chris Thomas, the producer, we sort of made it all up as we went along. And in the writing of it, I think how we worked, Michael and I, first of all, we were very fortunate because it was our 6th studio album as INXS, and we had lots of success in different areas of the world, and we already felt really fortunate. And particularly on the album before, on Listen Like These, where Giles first heard us, we had a top 5 hit in the United States, as you saw up on the screen before. But particularly what hit home to me was Chris called me at home to talk about What You Need on the album before Kick, and said, isn't it fantastic that you've had this huge hit, and you must feel fantastic about it. Why don't you go out and get laid or get drunk or something, or whatever it was. And I said, yeah, mate, yeah. And I hung up the phone. I walked around. I felt really funny for a while, you know. And I was sort of walking around. I suddenly realised I've got to go do that again, you know, somehow, you know. And I think Michael had been thinking exactly the same thing on some other part of the world, wherever he was. And that's why when the next album rolled around, when we got together, we went, oh, shit, you know, we really have to pull a rabbit out of the hat this time, you know, because they're all watching. Once you get everyone's attention, they're all looking at you, better be good. And so we actually talked about it a lot, and I really owe a huge debt of thanks, and we all do, for the band members of INXS, because they took a great sort of, a great overview of the situation. They said, well, look, you know, the chart success, a lot of it has been, you know, because Michael and I wrote songs, you know. So they said, look, you guys just write the whole album. And I felt incredibly, at that point, I'd been given this amazing ticket to go do something. And that was a huge thing for me personally. And I think it was for Michael too. But loops and all that stuff, and drum machines and funny sounds and the little thing that goes doing in the background and all those machines and everything. Yeah, we went on later after that to keep experimenting, you know, with music and everything. But it's really our fans too, you know, the people who followed INXS's journey, who really, we owe a huge debt of thanks to for following all this crazy stuff.
Is it true, so with the loop to New Sensation, is it true that you kept a cab waiting for something like 90 minutes?
Not with that one, no, but with Need You Tonight I did, yeah. And on that song, yeah, that's true. What happened was I was going to go over to meet Michael in Hong Kong, where he was living, and I think John might have been too at that point. But I went to work with Michael, and I found myself, just as the cab arrived, you know, I was sitting there and I was sort of going, you know, what is it, like, you know. You know, and I could hear that in my head, and I went, wow, you know, there's got to be something in there. I don't know, what is that? You know, so and I sat there and I put the tape recorder on, and I ran it, and then I thought, because in those days it was tape, and I thought, oh, I had 8 tracks to play with, so then I put a bass keyboard thing, and I put this other thing on it, and I had a drum machine running. And then the cab driver's like, well, come on, mate, if you don't get in the cab, I'm going. You know, and then I suddenly has domino effect, realising if I don't get in the cab, and I don't take the song over, then if I don't, you know, so I ran out, jumped in the cab, and when I got to Hong Kong at the other end, I got out and went straight round to the studio, and Michael was sitting there. He said, "G'day, mate, how you going?" It's pretty good. Come on, say, have a listen to this, because in those days it was on a cassette, you know, before USBs and all the rest of it. So he put it on, and he said, what is that? I said, I don't know. And then he sat down with a paper, which is one of the real geniuses of Michael. He sat down with a piece of paper and wrote that lyric and sang it. Just like that.
I love watching that the ABC documentary all those years ago of you and Michael doing Mystify, just working that out on the piano. And I always like it's just such a nice thing. How far along was that song when the ABC shot that? Was that because it looked like you were just working it out, but obviously you've got the song and then you've got the lyrics, and it just, I think as a listener and a very untalented musician, that's why I'm on radio, is that you wonder what goes into a song. Does the lyrics come first? Does the song come first? Or do you find like someone that you work in simpatico with, like Michael?
Yeah, good questions. I mean, I would say actually arrangement is huge. How you arrange music is an enormous thing. And that was what we were doing. When you actually watch that footage, you know, we were actually discussing the idea of what should be the chorus. We already knew the parts, but we didn't know the sequence that they should fall in. And it makes a huge difference, and as Giles knows, and working with the great producers we worked with over the years, you know, like Nile Rodgers and Mark Opitz here in Australia, legendary, and Chris Thomas, of course. You know, these people all know about arrangements, and that we're very conscious of it when we're putting the songs together.
And you'd agree with that, Giles, wouldn't you? Like, did you get like someone brings you a song and you think, well, hang on, that hook belongs here, or that belongs...
Yeah, and that's the thing about INXS and this album, and actually their songs anywhere, is that they... And it's to do with the band being great players. I mean, my experience of the band was actually live first. I was in a room with them in Japan, and we had this bizarre incident where we had like 10 Kodo drummers like playing, and it was, and I just thought, my God, this is like a you know, and also just this is like the Rolling Stones meet Chic. That's what I thought all the time. I was like, they're like just a powerful band. I mean, everyone in the band just can really play. I mean, they're here tonight. They're just amazing musicians. But what INXS do as a band, which is really important, and what's on this album is it's as my dad used to say, it's very efficient. You know, there's not material on the album that is just there for the sake of it. Everything has its place and makes it easy to mix because the songs are really well constructed, and they you know, and they're thought about, they're considered, and that's down to, you know, the genius of Andrew and Michael, the band, and also Chris Thomas, who's the producer. I mean, it's really important that you keep everything moving along, and you feel like when people listen to the album, it shifts. So it's great.
All killer, no filler. By the way, if you want to ask a question, I don't want to bogart all the questions. So we've got people with microphones in the crowd. So if you want to ask a question, think of something, and you know, don't what do you think of Australia so far? You know, like something that's, you know, I'm sure we've got a lot of music industry folks that would like to ask a question. Well, one other question I would ask of you, because it was a big diversion from Listen Like Thieves, wasn't it? Like Kick was like not as much as a rock album as what we'd been used to in the past.
Well, yeah, actually, if you listen to INXS's catalogue, all of our albums sound different to each other, which is sort of a nightmare for a record company, actually, because they want you to keep putting out the same thing, so they know how to market you, and then radio knows what to do with you. And the moment you deviate from that course, you're kind of in trouble. And I have a lot of sympathy for the people who tried to understand what we were doing half the time, because really we were sort of, in a sense, creative in a certain degree. We thought, you know, sort of commercial suicide half the time, you know, by simply being true to what we felt like we wanted to do. But I think that was the other thing that gave us the impetus to keep going, too, you know.
Yeah, it's an evolution, I guess. Like when you look at like a lot of bands, like say U2 and yourself, there was a time when you guys were having the same trajectory, and different albums. Like U2 had the Discotheque album, which was a bit of a diversion for
great band.
Yeah,
they're fantastic band.
Yeah, they're pretty good. I think they're doing all right.
Yeah, they are. Yeah.
Did you find that competitive at the same time? Like there's moments when Simon Le Bon from Duran Duran was sort of saying, "Man, these guys are playing so well." And I remember reading an article, the Radiators one time supported you at a gig, and you guys came on after them, and the Angels were there, and then you guys. And poor old Brian Nichols said, "Oh my God, you know, how are we going to compete with this?" You know, and they were at that moment, and the Radiators are no slouches. You know, they're a band that are still performing now.
Yeah.
But there's that. Is that competitiveness? Did you feel that?
Yeah, I mean, you know, you get into any field of endeavour, and the more you get to the pointy end of it, the more competitive it is. You can try to pretend it isn't, but it is, you know, and that's where it's heading. But I also felt, like I said before, tremendous support from people, you know, over the years, and you know, I actually, you know, the U2 guys are a great band and they're good people. I remember Bono said to me, before Michael passed away actually, I have to put on an image and a face and be this Mephisto guy, but that guy, your singer, is really a rock star, is what he said to me. And it was really interesting because, yeah, he very, but I also have to say that I think, I don't know that we ever set out to necessarily be rock stars. I think a lot of misconception about us is we actually like to have a really good time as people, you know. And when I hear horror stories of some people, what happened to them, it's sort of, you know, I mean, I think I look back on a lot of the memories when we were, you know, with Michael as a group, and most of what we were doing is incredibly positive, actually.
Giles, what's your favourite track on the album?
It's really hard. I mean, you know, I think probably right now, the one that is Devil Inside. I don't know, I really like Devil Inside. I feel like it just wraps around you. But listen, there's so many great tracks on the record. It's really hard.
And it's such a wall of sound, isn't it, as well? And even from the start with Guns in the Sky and radio, we use that opening bit that Michael does in a lot of promos and stuff. And you forget where it came from. I heard it like on another radio station. I thought, oh, well, that's from Guns in the Sky. And I think it's almost becoming meme-worthy by today's standards.
Meme-worthy.
That's about, I've got my seals at home, and everything's meme-worthy. This is it. So you're becoming meme-worthy. But people are using it in promos, in radio stuff. And radio's about that. It's about, you know, creating that, you know, I guess a mood and a wall of sound. But this particular album, as I said before, I'm not joking, it's put me through a radio career. I think I've been playing it since I started in 1990 and haven't stopped. So
but it's fascinating you mentioned the, you know, he won't say this, but it's fascinating you mentioned the competitive nature. And I've had the pleasure of working with some big bands or artists. The one thing they all have in common is they're brutally competitive with each other. I mean, but in a good way.
Yeah,
it's like being top sportsmen at the top of their game. They want to score more goals than anyone else, but they still respect the other player, or whatever. And that's the way. It's the most surprising thing. I always thought it was a bunch of stoners in the back of a van just going, "Hey, we play music." But there's another side to it, which isn't a bad thing, which is like we're going to write the best songs we can, and that's what everyone has in common.
Yeah, that's all true.
And then you're playing that Royal Variety performance in 1985, and Michael says, hey, you two, like to Prince Charles and Lady Di.
Yeah, no,
there in the crowd.
Yeah, no, that was really, we met them actually and talked to them, and amazing memories of that. And it was an exciting night. I was thinking back though on the Kick album, and also with Guns in the Sky, and we were playing a show in Chicago, and touring that album. And JFK Jr. and his wife, who were alive at the time, came to talk to us and said to her, you know, I just want to tell you, you know, you should be careful of that song because Ronald Reagan doesn't like it, you know, about the Star Wars thing, you know.
Wow.
Yeah, and it was strange because, you know, but...
So wait a second. You assaulted the royal family, and then the president.
Yeah, mate,
I mean, God, it's like amazing you survived. Yeah.
I know. Lucky Donald Trump's in charge, and it's all come
lucky you got someone peaceful.
That's right. Well, I think we have our own problems at home sometimes, but yeah, no, you know. But I was going to say that. What other track on the album did you know, for you? Is there anything else that you didn't expect to hear, or you know?
Yeah, I mean, it's funny how you I mean, obviously, it's funny. I was 18 when this came out, or 17 when it came out. So like, you know, the amount of girls I try to kiss never tear us apart, and all that sort of stuff. And I remember the video, and I was working as a runner in the studios when this album came out, and I mean, like, I forgot about the power of Kick, funny enough. And I work on these films, these Kingsman films. They're directed by a guy called Matthew Vaughn. And there's one actually in the cinema next door. You know, he goes, "What are you doing in Australia?" Because we're working on the film together. And I went, you know, we've remixed this. And he goes, "I've been trying to use that song Kick in every single film. You know, I just can't get it to work." It's funny that the power of that song it's not a forgotten song, but it's one of those. So there's lots of that was the fun thing about mixing this album, is you kind of, it's a bit like doing these mixes. It's a bit like doing an autopsy of a body. But in the case of a really good album, is you open it up and you realize it's in perfectly working order. You know, it's like everything is in place, and you try and put it back together as best you can so it makes you feel the same way. And that's the same with this record. So every song you go, wow, this is really well done. I remember this song.
Because you run a risk of, mucking around with it and then...
destroying it. Yeah, I hope I don't do that, yeah.
With that, it's interesting you say that about Kick, though, because that is a truly great song. But like, where did that come? When you wrote the album, was that the first song, or?
Well, actually, we recorded Kick in 2 sections, which is a brilliant idea of Chris Thomas as the producer, where we started out with one body of work and songs that we'd be recording, and then he made a very, what I call, wise decision to just say, look, stop, just take a breather, relax, go write some more music, and then come back. Whereas the pressure is always enormous. You get it from everybody, you know. And I guess in the background, Chris and other people would have been saying, just take it easy, let them do their thing. Whereas, you know, people when you get into that position, they want you to keep rolling because everyone benefits from it in some way, you know. And so for us to actually stop, take a breather and write some more songs, and I think Kick might have been one of them. And I think that was one of the ones with Needed Tonight that took over with me to Hong Kong to work with Michael, but I'm testing my memory 30 years ago now. But, yeah,
How long does it run for, mate?
Yeah, exactly.
4:21.
Yeah, that's right.
Any questions from the crowd? Yes. Oh, yes, we've got questions. We've got a microphone for these people. Like, I was padding this out so you guys could, do this sort of stuff. Oh, there you go. This man here.
Hey, guys. How are you?
Anytime you want to pipe in.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
All right, Andrew, I had a question for you. Mediate was the song. So it seemed very similar. Was that an homage to Bob Dylan? Because he did something very similar in the 60s where it was just a base of words.
Yeah, the video idea. Well, I think it was just because that repetitive sort of monologue, sort of slightly rap thing going through the words, you know. And we were trying to think of how to actually do that in a way without it looking, you know, boring. And I think I'm a fan of Bob Dylan's. I think it was great. You know? I like that video, actually. It's cool. You know?
Thank you. Who else we got?
I had a question about the Atmos mixing. I wanted to know if your use of reverb and delay in the rear speakers help you achieve a balance of clarity in studio recording and their live presence. Take a second.
Sorry, I couldn't hear you.
Yeah, sorry.
I wanted to know if using reverb and delay in the rear speakers helped you balance the live sound of their presence and the clarity of studio.
Yeah. So the question was, reverb and delays in the rears, that help balance the stuff in the front, technically.
Yeah.
Actually, the biggest challenge with something like an Atmos big room like this is actually getting clarity, because it's a big room, and you kind of want things to hit you in the chest, and you want the voice to hit you in the heart, actually, I think. And yeah, we do, I mean, there's a lot of technical stuff we do, but the essence is trying to put the song across. If you have too much delays, there's a lot of delays on Michael's voice in the original album. If I put the delays in the rear, there'd be this horrible thing. I heard a mix that someone did, and I won't mention what band or whatever, where the delay was in the rear, and you feel like the song's somewhere between the two of you, and you need that directness. So yeah, what we do is, what I quite like, I think you can listen to a single speaker and an album sounds great. So, but I think what you can do in a room like this is you can feel, if you have the reflections of the band around you, you kind of feel like you're in the room with them, and that's what we try and do. So there's a little guy down here. He needs a microphone. That guy here. He is the wise generation.
What was your favourite song to play live?
No, that's a really good question.
See, I told you that with the wise generation.
I have to say, probably Don't Change, which isn't from Kick, but, you know. And I think that was always, as Gary said earlier on today, an anthem for us to play live. We all contributed to the songwriting of the song, and it was always an exciting event for us, and it always was a great ending for the night. One of the great strange things of that is we never played at Wembley Stadium.
Really?
Yeah. I don't know why. Anyway,
Why not?
I don't know.
Well, someone forgot to write it down on the list.
Probably. Sure.
And the one thing, actually, my dad always said about one particular band he worked with, which is that the thing about a band is the sum of the band is greater than the single of its parts.
True.
And it was the case with INXS that when the 6 of them were together, and when they started playing and you were in a room with them, it was so powerful because they all knew what each other was doing. And it's a great thing about bands. It's a great thing about sometimes you lose with electronic music is that humans making noise together and that empathy you get, well, I guess, 3 brothers for a start. It's just very powerful. And that was a great thing about them live.
Any more? Any more questions?
In the middle there, mate.
Throw the mic.
Oh, it sounds good. I can hear you.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
I'm going to go over there. You hear us? Yeah.
Yeah, huge fans. I was just going to say, because I'm really interested in one thing in particular with the band itself. I've got my band, a few of my bandmates here, got my brother and my mate. We really do model ourselves on INXS. And I was just going to say, what thing worked the most for you in terms of the formula for writing your songs and getting your name out there?
Yeah. A lot of people have asked me that. I think a lot of it lies with what Giles said just before as well, is you work together, and you don't work on your strength, you work on your combined strengths, and you work out who's really good at what within your unit, and then you play to your strengths. You don't, argue with each other and mess about with things, and if you do, you make it up quickly. But you've got to focus all your attention. And when it comes to songs, it took us quite a long time, actually, to get it together, and I feel, in some ways, for the modern, some of the modern lack of support that you get in careers, where we were nurtured and helped, and we made mistakes, but people stuck with us and somehow believed in it. But we were also a damn good live band, I have to say. We always were. And so I think, I think that's something that you should always, keep in your quiver, in your arsenal, because it's something that will guide you through some really tough times.
What's the name of your band?
The Vinyl Press.
The Final Press.
The Final Press.
The Vinyl Press. Facebook, Instagram.
Look out for the Vinyl Press.
Can I ask a quick question? So I'm Jake's dad. Jonesy, I've met you before, mate. I came through radio. Andrew, love the band, mate. Fantastic job. Great album. And your work, sir, very fantastic. Who were your main influences coming through Australian rock?
That's interesting. Well, actually, I have to acknowledge, the sad loss of George Young, people like George Young and the early sort of pioneers in Australian rock. Those guys really took things into places that were very tricky, and I'm sure, Giles would know too that with the success, and others, of course, would know that there was that British invasion into the US, and so everybody in Australia probably thought for a long time you had to go through the UK somehow to be successful in the United States or somewhere else, Well, I have to say that isn't true, actually. You don't really have to do that. The first thing you've got to do is to believe in what you're doing, take it anywhere, and then people will see you believe in it and they'll go buy it, Because if you don't believe in it, no one's going to get it, So I think that's one of the things. I hope I answered the question.
Anyone else? Down the front here.
Andrew, did Michael ever explain how he came up with lyrics?
At times, yeah. We both wrote lyrics, but when I first met him, and we were school kids, really, he never really played an instrument. His instrument was his voice, But what he always did, from the moment I met him, was he was interested in literature. He used to read a lot of things which, when we were all playing footy and chasing girls and there was drinking beer and meat pies and stuff, he'd be talking about Herman Hesse and Siddhartha and Karl Gibran and all these literary people. I go, what was the middle bit again, as far as trying to keep up with, and he had this thing where unfortunately, he'd been through a tumultuous period in his teenage years and he went to live in Los Angeles and his he went to North Hollywood High School, which a lot of people don't understand. And later on, when we went to the United States, the US immediately picked up on the fact that he was US savvy. He wasn't just turning up on the docks, that he actually knew exactly who he was talking to and what we were doing there, you know. In fact, you know, one of the first shows we did was Rock and Roll Tonight in Los Angeles. I think it was 1983. And I remember standing there, and Ray Manzarek from the Doors came back into, you know, backstage, and was standing there, and I thought, wow, you know, because I knew exactly who he was, you know. And he was saying, "Where's your singer?" And I said, "Well, he's over there," you know. So he went over and he talked to him. And I heard him say to him, I was sitting at home watching television, and when that guy came on television, I felt I'd always known him, you know. It was bizarre, right? So he came in and he was talking. But I think Michael's lyrics, to get back to your question, I think Michael was a great communicator, you know. And I think great songs and great songwriters, especially, you know, have the ability to touch you somehow and don't have to say very much, really, with what they're saying, but it hits home. And for me, I still write lyrics, and I wrote lyrics, but I didn't want to compete with him, because I also realised early on in the piece that there's no reason for me to tell him not to get it out of him. And that when he walks on stage, especially the bigger and bigger and bigger the stage has got, the last thing I would want him to think was he has a voice that can't be heard. Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm short-sighted up the back there. Thanks, Atmos.
G'day, Andrew and Giles. There was just a couple of changes to the vocal tracks in a couple of the songs that maybe I heard. One was in New Sensation and one might have been in Tiny Daggers. Was that true? Just when he said solo rather than trumpet, and also an intonation with one of the lines in Tiny Daggers. Was that right?
If it was, it wasn't deliberate. You know, I wish Michael had come back and been there. I don't know. I mean, you know, I didn't change anything. We mixed from what the Moz tracks we had, and I think that they should be the same. But if they were different, then that's cool. It's something else. I mean, I was talking to Andrew about the process. I mean, listen, the Kick album sounds fantastic. It was mixed by Bob Clearmountain. It was produced by Chris Thomas, and you got two of the best people ever, actually. And what we did with this is slightly different. It's a surround immersive mix, and if there are quirks in it, I think that's quite a good thing in a funny way. But I don't know. There was nothing deliberate in that world. But if there was, and the other thing about this actually is that it's so important that there's so much music around all the time, and we hear it, we don't actually listen. And the great thing about this sort of event is that people actually listen, and that's a huge thing. You know, with music streamed all the time, and people don't listen to albums anymore. And so I think that if you guys are picking up that stuff, that's brilliant. But it wasn't intentional, and I'm certainly at fault for lots of things that I've done in life.
Fan here.
My question is for Andrew. How did it feel at Wembley when you saw all the people that came to hear your music?
All right, well, I'm going to use a swear word, okay? Oh, yeah.
Block your ears.
Yeah, right. I was going to say that my brother Tim put it really well, that it was crazy, actually. That particular day was really nuts. But some people, I think, may not realise, you know, which is fair enough, that Wembley wasn't the only sort of stadium that we did. We were in that particular tour, which was actually not in the 80s, it was in the early 90s. And we played many stadiums, including Rock in Rio, which is 180,000 people, and there was Texas Stadium, where our support bands were Guns N' Roses, Iggy Pop, and Ziggy Marley. Bob's old band, the Wailers, were actually playing with Ziggy. It was awesome. And they were good people, all good people. But the point is that when we actually got to Wembley Stadium to do the show, we'd played in Wembley Arena. We did 7 nights, actually, before that. Before we actually played the stadium, we played 7 nights, Wembley Arena. But I remember standing there, and we probably all have our own story if you ask us different stories. Mine was, I looked around the room and there was about 200 or so people backstage. and there were people like Peter Gabriel and Deborah Harry and other, Bill Wyman and other people, and I was going, oh, hooly dooly, because these people, I'm massive fans of these people myself, and I suddenly felt really nervous, as you guys all know I get anyway. So I took a beer and I got a cigarette, which I did back then, and I went into the toilet and just sort of locked the door and sat there and had this beer and a cigarette. And then the Scottish guy says to me later on, "Do you mean to tell me at the height of your career you go into the crapper and you just you have a fucking cigarette and a beer?" And I said, "Well, pretty much, yeah, that's right."
Andrew's not advising you do that, by the way.
So, yeah. And that was my way of coping.
Yeah. But it would have been extraordinary. It would have been extraordinary to have all these people that, like Mick Jagger showing up to gigs and stuff like that. That must have been a real mind-blowing
Well,
thing.
actually, yeah, the Farriss, our dad, Dennis, who passed away in 2014, he actually came to one of our shows in Adelaide, and because he was from London, and Mick Jagger came along to that show, and I'll never forget turning around and him and Mick and my dad said, "Go anyway, yeah, and they're having this chat and everything." I thought, this is really surreal, But actually, my understanding is Mr. Jagger has family out here, I think, because his mum was Australian, I think.
I think Mick Jagger has family in a lot of places in the world.
That would be true, Giles. Any other questions? Oh, we have heaps now. This is good. Up the back there.
Look, my favourite moment from the whole Kick era is when you guys swept the pool at the MTV Music Awards. Yeah, great night. Yeah. Well played. It's got to be pretty tough for a non-British, non-American act to win one award at the MTVs, let alone sweep the pool. So I'm wondering, how confident were you going into that night? Did you have any indication that you were going to win several awards on the one night at, what was one of the biggest music shows globally of the year?
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, no, the MTV Awards was a really good thing for us, and I remember we got out of limousines as we were walking in, and Sinead O'Connor saw us walking around and said "wankers" or something as we walked in. And then afterwards, when we get these awards and we're staying there and we're leaving, and it's all a bit surreal because you get ushered around by everyone with these things, And as we're leaving, I'll never forget Robin Williams ran up and grabbed Tim's bag to be a gag, "I've got your bag, sir," and runs past like this and runs off in the distance or something. And I was going, "What?" And he's running off in the distance, but it was, I hope he got his bag back. But anyway, but the point is, the actual awards, meant a lot to all of us, but we had some, surreal experiences as well, with, well, lots of things, but before that as well, I remember seeing Andy Warhol on the King's Road in London, because we were there promoting Listen Like Thieves, the album before Kick, and he was standing in CDs were brand new, and he was standing with his assistant, and he was putting the CDs in a backpack of his assistant, and then I thought, how about that? And he walked out, and then we went over to New York with the